Most conversations about work today focus on burnout. People are tired, leaders are overwhelmed, and managers are stretched thin. And every year, the numbers get worse. But I want to ask a different question. These used to be my questions earlier in my career, but now, not why are people burning out, but why does organizational design make it predictable? Why do organizations consistently root unresolved strain, decision failure, emotional residue, and adaptive burden into the same kinds of people and the same kinds of positions, generation after generation? I came to accept that this is not just incidental, it's not just an individual's problem. This is structural. And in the age of artificial intelligence, when AI is pressing down on workplace systems that were already shaky and unsustainable, the stakes of that question have never been higher. This is not just a workplace issue. It is an ethical issue. It is a justice issue. And through a womanist lens, it raises the question of whether our systems are built in right relationship or sustained through hidden, unequal sacrifice. I think we know the correct answer to that question. For decades, organizations have treated burnout as an individual problem, a resilience deficit, a personal failure to manage stress. A corporate training and workplace consulting industry, a $400 billion industry, according to SkyQuest's 2024 Global Corporate Training Market Report, has been selling individual solutions to structural realities for decades. And yet, the numbers continue to rise. According to Gallup's State of the American Workplace Report, only 31% of U.S. employees were engaged at work in 2024. That is at a 10-year low. According to Deloitte's Workplace Burnout Survey, 77% of employees have experienced burnout at their current job, even higher for women of color, especially Black women. These are not individual failures. These are structural signals, because strain does not disappear. It gets absorbed. The real question is not whether strain exists. The real question is, where does it go? And the answer, when you look at the data, when you look at history, is that strain gets routed into specific people, high capacity individuals, those who can absorb what the system cannot hold, those for whom saying no carries the greatest professional cost. How systems route burden and the AI acceleration factor. Organizational theorists have long documented what Arlie Hochschild named emotional labor in 1983. The work of managing feeling as part of professional performance. Imagine that. What they did not fully anticipate was how that labor would compound as organizations became more complex and less structurally accountable. What we see consistently is this. Competence leads to increased invisible load. When someone demonstrates that they can stabilize a system, the system routes more instability toward them. A load path, like in the foundation of a building and the load-bearing frames, beams. They become structural compensation for design failures that was never addressed. This creates what I call the responsibility authority asymmetry. People carry the weight of decisions they did not make and cannot change because the authority to change them sits elsewhere in the system. The system functions not because it is well designed, it functions because someone is carrying what it cannot. Then AI arrives. According to a 2026 Mercer Global Workforce Survey of 12,000 respondents, 40% of the global workforce now fears losing their jobs to AI, up from 28% the prior year. Personally, I think that number is much higher. AI does not reduce the pressure on workplace systems. It accelerates what already exists. It presses down on structures that were already shaky and unsustainable. The guardrails on AI development, in the words of the industry's own researchers and executives, have been removed. The major AI laboratories are in a race to build artificial general intelligence, AGI, across countries, with leading researchers projecting readiness between 2027 and 2032. Whoever gets to the finish line the fastest claims the prize, and in that race, the question of who absorbs the cost is not even on their minds. Let's look at this through a womanist lens and the continuity of the pattern. That was Fannie Lou Hamer testifying before the Credentials Committee of the 1964 Democratic National Convention, a sharecropper and civil rights organizer from Sunflower County, Mississippi, beaten for trying to register to vote, evicted from her home for claiming her citizenship, silenced at the convention by a president who called an impromptu press conference to get her off the air. She named the pattern. She named what the system expected her to absorb, and she refused to absorb it silently. She named her own humanity in the face of a structure that was designed to make her remain invisible. Womanist theology, developed by scholars including Dolores Williams, Katie Cannon, Melissa Harris Perry, and so many more brilliant Black women, centers the lived experience of Black women as a legitimate source of knowledge and as a diagnostic lens for understanding structural injustice. As Harris Perry documents in her 2011 book, Sister Citizen, she speaks of the crooked room. Black women have historically been required to navigate, stabilize, and compensate for systems that simultaneously deny their full humanity and depend on their labor to function. Make that make sense. This is not a metaphor. This is a structural description that has gone on for centuries. The masking tax, a concept I have developed in my work on organizational systems, describes the additional cognitive and emotional labor required when individuals must perform a version of themselves that is acceptable to the system rather than authentic to their actual nature and identity. The load path describes how strain travels through a system and where it terminates. In most organizations, it terminates in the same people over and over again, generation after generation. The system does not break despite this pattern. It works because of it. And now, as AI accelerates the pressure on workplace systems, a new whistleblower is naming a new version of the same pattern. That was Dr. Timnit Gebru. She was silenced for naming what the system was doing. You may remember her. She was fired by Google. The pattern Hamer named in 1964 named the truth about what the system extracts from the people it depends on and pay the professional price. Is the same pattern Gebru named in 2020. 60 years apart, different technology, same routing logic. And Karen Hao, the first journalist to ever profile OpenAI and author of the 2025 National Book Critics Circle award-winning Empire of AI. Names where that logic leads. Dr. Timnit Gebru is an Eritrean Ethiopian computer scientist who co-led Google's ethical AI team until she was fired in December 2020 for co-authoring a paper documenting the harms of large language models. She is the founder of the Distributed AI Research Institute, DAIR, which documents the impact of artificial intelligence on marginalized communities. The pattern persists, only the form has changed. The justice frameworks. Karen Labax, in Six Theories of Justice, published in 1986, argues that different frameworks of justice ask fundamentally different first questions. The question a theory begins with shapes everything it can see and everything it cannot, revealing blind spots. I want to apply two of those frameworks to the ethical question I have just described. The first is Rawlsian social contract theory. The first question Rawls asks is this: what principles of justice would rational people choose if they did not know their own position in society? That's really interesting. Behind what Rawls calls the veil of ignorance, not knowing whether you would be the manager or the managed, the high-capacity absorber or the one whose strain gets absorbed, what rules would you consent to? Applied to organizational design, Rawls demands that structures be arranged so that the least advantaged members of the system benefit, are not systematically disadvantaged. The responsibility authority asymmetry, where some people carry the weight of decisions they cannot make or change, fails that test directly. No rational person would consent to that arrangement from behind the veil of ignorance. For instance, someone accepting middle management, knowing that they're going to be responsible for carrying the weight of the company without any authority to make that happen. Applied to the AI race, Rawls asks, would the 40% of workers who now fear losing their jobs to AI have consented to an accelerated process with no guardrails if they did not know whether they would be among those displaced? The reason why I think that number is much larger is because there have been other factors in the past year where we have record numbers of unemployed peoples, especially Black women. The answer is clearly no. The current AI race is not Rawlsian. It concentrates benefit at the top and distributes the risk at the bottom, just like so many other things in our society. The second framework is liberation theology. The first question liberation theology asks is, where is God already working among the oppressed, and what does justice require of those who have power? Developed by scholars including Gustavo Gutierrez and brought into the womanist tradition by Dolores Williams and Katie Cannon, liberation theology begins not from a neutral position, but from the margins. It insists that the experience of those who suffer under unjust structures is theologically authoritative, not peripheral. Liberation theology does not ask, would a rational person choose from a neutral position? It asks, what does the person who is already carrying the weight require of us? And what does faithfulness demand in response? This reminds me of the concept of the miner's canary. Applied to organizational design, liberation theology does not begin with a veil of ignorance. It begins with Fannie Lou Hamer, already in the jail cell, already absorbing the licks and the horrible screams, already carrying what the system deposits in her body because she tried to register to vote. From that starting point, The ethical demand is not a design a fair system from scratch. It is to confront the existing structure that is already extracting from people who were never asked to consent. Applied to the AI era, liberation theology asks, who is already being harmed by the race to AGI, and what do we owe them? Dr. Gebru's answer and her work at DARE is that the communities most harmed by algorithmic bias, most displaced by AI acceleration, and least represented in AI development rooms are the communities whose experience should be centered, not managed. What Rawls and liberation theology share, despite their differences, is a refusal to accept that the current distribution of burden is natural or inevitable. Both demand structural accountability. Both insist that the relationship between those who design systems and those who absorb their costs must be interrogated. If a system depends on certain people to absorb strain silently in order to function, it is ethically compromised. Whether you arrive at that conclusion from behind a veil of ignorance or from the testimony of others like Fannie Lou Hamer, the conclusion is the same. The civil rights connection. The modern civil rights movement was not only a struggle against legal segregation, it was a struggle against the structural routing of burden, risk, violence, and economic deprivation into Black bodies and communities. Because that routing served the interest of a system those communities had not consented to. Dr. King's letter from Birmingham jail, written April 1963, did not simply argue for integration. It argued that the tension the movement was creating was necessary to expose a structural injustice that those who benefited from it were not motivated to see. He drew simultaneously on Catholic social teaching. God calls us to share. Protestant Christian realism. Social sin must be confronted with grace. Rawlsian principles of basic dignity for the most vulnerable. King understood that different frameworks were necessary to reach different audiences. What both frameworks required of him was the same thing: name the pattern, bear witness to who is carrying the weight, and refuse to accept that arrangement as natural. The struggle for dignity and recognition in the workplace, for inclusion that comes from real structural support, for responsibility that comes with real authority, is the continuation of that same work in a different form. Inclusion without structural support is not inclusion. It is extraction with better language. Responsibility without authority is not leadership development. It is a burden distribution. And the AI acceleration era is creating a new frontier of the same question. Who gets to participate in designing the future? Whose experience is treated as data? And whose is treated as authoritative? Who absorbs the cost of acceleration? And who captures the benefits? The civil rights tradition answers those questions with clarity. The most vulnerable must not bear the greatest risk. The people most harmed must be centered in the design process. Right relationship must be restored, no longer just managed. All right, so I wanted to take a moment to go over this little diagram for you to give you a better idea what I'm talking about here. This kind of simplifies it, okay? So we have the traditional labor work systems and organizational design. Here is where the burnout, the high turnover, the silent quitting, ignoring the miner's canary, and so forth lives in this system that has been extremely extractive from the days of agriculture and chattel slavery to the days of the Industrial Revolution, to the days of the information age, to the days of now, okay? Because we had the AI era that we entered into, but now we are getting ready to shift into a new future of work. So this is where we are. Most people are here, okay? Here's the workplace. And AI accelerates what already exists, okay? This is where we need to be. Sustainable human and AI alliance workforce, because those that have taken off the guardrails have allowed AI to get to a place that it's never been before, and it's moving at exponential speeds. Think of it this way: AI is helping to expedite AI. I learned AI through asking AI to teach me how to learn AI. And that's what AI is literally doing on a daily basis, minute by minute, hour by hour. So the projection is that we may see AGI become a reality somewhere between 2027 and 2032, depending on who the person is that's making the projections. What does that mean? That means that we are going to have a sentient brain that will be able to ultimately remove the human workforce for the most part. Obviously, not completely. And I do think that many humans are going to be resistant to it, at least at the beginning, and wanting to still have humans. And you have two camps in this, right? In the traditional labor work systems and organizational design. You have the people that want to get rid of all their human labor and keep all of the money and just use machines. And then you have those that actually have a sense of justice within themselves, and they want to be able to figure out how to still maintain a human workforce and bring that together with AI, a human and AI workforce alliance. Okay. Now, who do you think in the workplace actually pays the price? Really? I'm going to leave that as an open ended question. This unmask is my own framework that I believe can be used to help to create structure. I am conducting research on this. I am working to get data sets on the effects of this AI acceleration on the workplace specifically. And most likely, I want to focus on Black women and other people of marginalized communities to see how we are being affected by this. Unmask stands for uncover, navigate, manage, advocate, sustain, and kindle. If you want to learn more about the Unmask framework, you can visit my website at strategictransformations.net. Thanks for listening. So the issue is not that people are simply just overwhelmed. The issue is that organizational design makes that overwhelm predictable and assigns it unevenly. Fannie Lou Hamer named that pattern in 1964. Dr. Timnit Gebru named it in 2020. The scholars of the womanist tradition have named it in every generation in between. Justice, as Dr. Franklin teaches, is about restoring right relationship, not optimizing the existing agreement. Restoring right relationship. From a Rawlsian frame, that means designing systems that no one would consent to bearing the worst of, from behind a veil of ignorance. From a Liberation Theology frame, that means centering the people who are already carrying the weight as both the diagnostic starting point and the primary beneficiary of any just redesign. Both frameworks point to the same work: not more resilient people, systems that no longer require people to break in order to function. And in the AI era, that goal is no longer optional. It is the difference between a future that includes us and one that does not.